Roderick, it's super exciting to have you here with us today. Just for the folks who are joining us, a little bit of an introduction. So, Hive Perform, as an organization, which is the business that I'm from, transforms sales readiness from a one-time event into an intelligent journey. So, what we're all about is giving reps their own AI-powered coach that really helps to turn learning and practice into revenue. We believe that sales excellence comes from practice of personalization, not just passive content consumption. And every minute saved in reaching full productivity translates into the bottom line. It's about in the flow coaching that adapts to each rep's needs and activities. So that's why I'm particularly excited today to have Roderick join us. He is an expert in sales enablement and performance development, and he's going to show us today how to transform your 90-day onboarding cliff into a sustainable journey of growth, helping us to unlock the true potential of the organization's tribal knowledge. And his insights into everboarding couldn't be more relevant as we tackle the challenge of turning learning into lasting performance. So a little bit about Roderick. He's a senior executive, if you haven't heard of him already, with 20 years of sales enablement leadership experience. He's a keynote speaker and an acknowledged practitioner in the sales enablement space who really understands how to create bridges between internal organizations to empower sales and exceed expectations. He's a #1 best-selling author of the new book, Sales Enablement 3.0, The Blueprint to Sales Enablement Excellence. And he's also a founding member of the Sales Enablement Society and has served on several advisory boards. When he's not working on sales enablement projects and programs, he can be found perfecting the art of barbecuing. Hope to taste it one day, Roderick. And he also is bocce in the backyard with his family. So just a little bit of housekeeping before I give Roderick the stage. If you do have questions as we go, you can drop them into the chat. You'll see me disappear in a minute and I will start to answer those as we go through, and I'll pop back up at the end and we can talk through a few questions for Roderick or myself at the end of his session too. So I'm really looking forward to it, Roderick. So excited to hand the microphone over to you and hear more about what you've got to share with us today.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to join. I'm incredibly honored and excited to have the partnership with Hive Perform because you're right. I think we are symbiotic and we are certainly mutually equitable and bring something to each other that is much needed. One is the platform and the other is the background and the experience. So, as we said, I want to talk today about what happens after 90 days. There's so much energy and so much excitement that's placed on the learning program and process and building that foundation with our newbies, which is a great place to be because we all know the way you start is the way that you move forward. The problem is we've been so focused on just the newbies that we tend to forget about our legacy sellers. We let information flow out of the door. We push all of the emphasis and all of the excitement around the newbies. Well, it's time that we change that and not just change it, but add it as an algebraic build. Think about building a house. Your foundation starts and your house will be determined upon how strong or how weak your foundation is. The same thing goes for learning because learning is an ongoing, it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. This is something that never ends. And I think the best companies that I've seen are those that focus on not just the initial 90 days, but that continuing education that we call everboarding. And why does that matter? To me, there are 3 reasons. The first is, as we all know, there is an ever ongoing adaptation of change. Change is difficult. Change can be painful. And I'm the first to say it. I've been a part of 14 M&A activities. I know a little bit about painful change. But the other great, wonderful reason is the evolution of changes in market trend, in technology, in the deeper immersion of AI, and how it can help now to create more productivity as well as increase revenue. Back to the old days of working smarter, not harder. As we all know, AI has completely changed that mindset as well as that approach. The other reason is it's continually sharpening that sword for your legacy folks and not just your sellers. I think about this as a go-to-market function from the front end where we're looking at things like messaging, positioning, onboarding, continuing ed, workshops around discovery and qualification, as well as all of the other plethora of things, the programs, the platforms that come into place. Because things are happening so fast, if you try doing things the way you've always done it, it's your death nail. It will ensure that your company becomes a dinosaur, which no one wants to be. Because whether you're innovating and you're constantly sharpening that sword, guess what? Your competitors are. And so you instantly put yourself behind them if you're not keeping up. And no one wants to be the follower. It's also an opportunity to drive innovation, right? It's the collaboration of all of the various lines of business working together. It's the clear and concise communication that's required to really set that foundation that ultimately leads to orchestration. And that is making sure that not everyone is just rowing in the same direction, but as a friend of mine, Tim Ojai, says, it's not enough to have people on the right bus. It's about having them on the right, in the right seat inside of that bus as well. And that's what that continual everboarding does for you, right? And as I said, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. I look at it as a continuum of that XY axis, as you see, of efficiency and effectiveness. Well, it starts on the front end with bringing in the right folks. Companies are so focused on their ICP or ideal client profile. I think I've stepped a bit from that. Now it's about the IEP, the ideal employee profile, bringing in folks that are going to help your company accelerate moving forward, not just how you got to where they are now, but where are you going on the next level and how are you going to get there? And then it starts with making sure that you've got a solid onboarding program. That onboarding comes in two flavors. One, it's having everyone together so that one, you understand, respect, and also value all of the various pieces that go into closing a sale, integrating your platform or your service, and then how do you now create customers for life on the back end, whether it be CSMs or customer support. The other flavor is what's too technical for one is not technical enough for another. And so it's important that you get a chance to break these different roles out so that they can learn from the best of the best. And that's where bringing those legacy folks into your onboarding program, bringing your leaders and having the leaders own the adoption, the execution, but most importantly, the execution of this piece, right? It's the positive modeling of that, because we as enablement practitioners, we can give you the best program in the planet, but if the leaders don't believe in it, they don't buy into it, and they don't own it, it dies on the vine. The next is that everboarding piece. As I said, it's about continually sharpening the sword so that as the market changes, as acquisitions happen, as new technologies evolve, the key is you don't need all of them all the time. It's really about understanding where your company's maturation cycle is and what works right now and what doesn't. Because as enablement leaders, we share a lot of information, a lot of content. And I've realized something: everything doesn't work everywhere. So just because your peer or your friend has success with a particular process, program, platform, whatever it may be, does not guarantee that it's going to be successful for you. So make sure you understand where you are in that maturation cycle, but more importantly, where you're trying to get to. Because in order to do that, that means having access to the right assets in a single location so that now, and also the most updated version controlled information, because I'm an old sales guy myself. I'm not going to go to 4 or 5 different places to find information. Know what's going to happen? I'm either going to create something or I'm going to go to one of my peers and say, hey, what are you using? And guess what happens? It starts to dilute the messaging of your company. So make sure that it's easy to find, make sure it's always updated, and most importantly, make sure that there is a direct feed loop so that you can get that bilateral conversation between what's happening in the real world and also going back to marketing, product management, etc., so that they can make the changes and implement those changes that your prospects and your customers are asking for. The next is all about reinforcement, and that's working with those leaders and creating more leaders and less managers. It's really about showing them where I need you to drive the bus to, now that you've got those people on your bus, as I said earlier. But more importantly, it's about teaching them some new best practices. Even sometimes it's tips and tricks. Sometimes it's being able to have them expunge what they're feeling or learn something new. Also, another thing you get from this is you find out who the cheerleaders are for all of the other pieces that I've just spoken about, and they become those cheerleaders on your behalf. The next piece is about metrics and measurements, excuse me. And I don't mean smiley sheets and butts and seats. No one cares how many people have taken your test or quiz and you've enabled 8,000 people and it's a 4.9 out of 5. $7 and get you a latte. That's about what it's worth these days. Make sure that you have true revenue focused metrics and measurements and that you agree with your leadership team because I need them to drive it from the top down. Enablement has to be woven into the fabric of your company and your company's culture in order for this to happen. Otherwise, enablement is viewed as the fixtures of broken things and broken people, which we certainly are not. And the last piece is all about succession planning. As I said earlier, it's about making sure that you're creating more leaders and less managers because the way we used to do it just doesn't work anymore. And so, what I've realized now over the last 20 years of running enablement is there's a 90-day cliff. And when I say cliff, that's about as much as folks can take on the information they're getting in the onboarding piece, and then it starts to fade away and one of two things happen. Either you come in with the next level of everboarding, or guess what happens? You tend to forget what you've done and you start to do things the way that it's really happening out in the quote unquote real world from the legacy folks. So to help on that, it's making sure that, as I said earlier, building that house, you set that foundation around the basics of who you are, what you do, why you do, who's your ICP, how do you have those conversations, how do you build out consistent messaging and positioning, how do you start now to move towards the next step, which is skill development. And that's around things like discovering qualification, objection handling, understanding the competitive landscape. Now, this is where it starts to move away from I'm just brand new to now I'm starting to move into that next level of onboarding and progressing my career. Because now you've got workshops, you've got webinars, you've got associations, all the things that you can do to move forward. And I want to make a very clear statement. Enablement is not about an organization. I have to say that the leaders and the individuals must, must, must invest into themselves. We can only give you so much, and we'll give you everything we've got. We are give to give kind of people. But at the same time, I learned a long time ago from one of my mentors that no one has the vested interest that you have in your career. So don't let your manager, your peers, your spouse, your friends, anyone drive your career but you, because you've got a different level of investment in that, and you're the one that has to go through it every day. And that's where I talk now about investing beyond just what's happening inside the walls, right? There's a ton of e-learning out there. There are a ton of books out there, right? But the e-learning piece is one of those that's great, as we all know, because we're a mobile world. Where you go, it goes with you. But it's also an opportunity to listen to things like podcasts where you can constantly sharpen that sword. I listen to probably 2 to 3 a week, the podcasts. Why? Because even though I'm an author, I'm not one that's going to sit down and read a whole lot because I don't have a lot of time. But whether I'm in the gym, whether I'm working out in the backyard, whether I'm taking a walk, whatever I'm doing, I'm in my car driving. Guess what? I'm a captive audience. So why not invest in myself while I'm doing it? Then there are accreditations and certifications outside of what's being offered inside of your company. Never underestimate the power of getting external certifications because as you progress in your career, you will move from company to company. Rarely are you going to stay there for your entire career. So guess what goes with you? Those accreditations, those certifications go with you, and they cannot be taken away. There are a ton of conferences and events every year. And as a keynote speaker, I go to those, one, because I'm speaking, the obvious, but I go because I'm actually learning more than probably some of the people that are out in the audience, because I get a chance to mix and mingle with brand newbies. I get a chance to mix with some of my peers and folks that validate and that I look up to as well. And so it's a constant learning continuum. And then it's about joining different associations, whether it be Sales Enablement Collective or Revenue Enablement Society, whatever it may be, because it's important that you surround yourself with other people, because otherwise it becomes an echo chamber, right? And what you get from those professional associations are diversity of thought, an opportunity to learn something different. And if you do it right, learn some things that what well beyond what you were expecting. And so that begins that not only continuous learning, but what I call a culture of continuous learning, right? And so it starts on that front end of setting that foundation. You've got the slab, you've got the post tension, you've got the frame, the black paper, and the windows on your house with onboarding. The knowledge share now is the equivalent of I've got a roof, I've got a door, because I'm learning from other people cross functionally what's working for them, what's not working for them. And by the way, sometimes, as my mom used to say, you learn how to or how not to. Either way, you learn. The key is that you never close your mind to learning something, irrespective of what someone's title is, what their background is, whether they're seen as green, new, and junior, or people that you look and admire. There's something that can be learned from each of those. And if you're open, most of the time, they're going to learn something from you, and you may not even know that you're teaching because you're just living. And the last piece is the celebratory piece. It's now I've got the floors, I've got the cabinetry, I've got all of my appliances. And anyone that's bought a new home, what's the first thing you do? You can't wait to invite people over to celebrate all the hard work that took for you to build that house. Companies, remember, as with people, you're building a house in them. Don't forget to celebrate, and don't just celebrate the newbies. Make sure that you're letting those legacy people know that you're appreciated, we're investing in you, and we're looking forward to you as our guiding light and our North Star to continually moving things forward, whether it's from a mentor perspective or it's one-on-one. Look, it doesn't take a whole lot. And for my entire career, I've heard this same statement: salespeople are coin operated. Oh, there's definitely some truth to that. But remember, there are people, yes, even in sales, that are not necessarily driven by just monetary pieces. Sometimes they want to hear that they've done a good job. Sometimes they want to be validated by their peers. Sometimes they want to see their name up in lights. Sometimes they want to go on to one of your webinars and give out their best practices. Understand what actually drives your people and meet them where they are. Because when we start peanut buttering is when we have a problem of treating everyone the same and assuming the worst. We all know what happens when we assume. I'll leave that alone. And here's the best piece that you get from your legacy folks. Look, as I said earlier, people are going to move around. I've realized you're going to have 6 to 8 jobs in your career. Your passion will find you. But that also requires that sometimes you move in order to grow, whether it be personally, professionally, or monetarily. But the other thing, and the best part for companies, is as people move outside of the company, if you have mechanisms and processes and tools in place to harness what I call that tribal knowledge that normally walks out of the door with them, guess what? It's your opportunity to make sure that it stays in house. Why? Because that knowledge exchange will live well beyond that individual or group of people that leave. And all of that best practices, tips, tricks, etc., all stays in house. The next piece is it creates, as I said earlier, of that diversity of thought. And it gives an opportunity to say, you know what? This is how it works in San Francisco. But wait, in EMEA, it's done differently. In India, it's differently. In Germany, it's different. So what you do is you bring it all together, put it in a big bag, shake it up, and all of the dust goes away. But guess what? All the good stuff and the goodness stays with you. And now you can build on top of it, even without having, as I said earlier, those individuals in house. And a word that tends to scare people: accountability. Everybody wants to do some, not everybody wants to be accountable. You know what, though? Holding each other accountable is really what drives growth, because just saying something, as we all know, is not enough. If you're not out there living it, then you're not loving it. And if you're not loving it, you're not doing it. So no one wants to hear, oh, okay, this is how I've seen it, or I think, or I feel. If you can help me take that out of your vocabulary, none of that matters. The accountability comes from the outcomes, the successes, the closed deals, the increased renewals, all the things that lead to true revenue generating metrics and measurements. But aside from just those, it's the things that are going to help you improve productivity and increase revenue. So, with that, and if you'll come back out, I have now gotten to the end. And hopefully, what I've done is given you some things that you can take right now and go put into practical application. So, I would love to open this up for conversation and questions. Anna, I hope that I've hit the mark on what we're looking to do today.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Roderick. I really appreciate your perspectives. And if for the folks who are joining us live, if you've got questions, do pop them in the chat and I'll come back to them. But one that's already come through, Roderick, that I wanted to throw your way. I think you talked about the learning all the time. You talked about the attending the events. You also talked about the tribal knowledge. And there where you talked about the 6 to 8 jobs referenced in your career, this question just really spoke to me. So in your experience, what do you see as some of the biggest barriers that organizations are facing with capturing and scaling that knowledge that's at risk of walking out the door?
That's a fantastic question. I think it starts, and I'll go back to my communication, collaboration, and orchestration piece. Here's where I see things not work. We don't have clear communication of what's important or have the mechanisms that are scalable and repeatable in place to harness that. Secondly, is the collaboration. I don't think we go to our legacy sellers enough to say, hey, talk to me and let's record how you did this. You create a standard sheet of questions, go and ask them, no different than if we were doing an SKO and RKO, right? We do those customer references and case study conversations. Why do we only do it once or twice a year? Why do we do that on an ongoing basis? Find some folks that have your largest deals, have some emerging deals where they got in and it was land and expand. But more importantly, talk about the why this actually happened. Who were the players that were included? How did they come about? When there were hiccups, how did you get through that? And then go to customer success and let's go talk to some of our existing companies and ask them a single question.
Hmm.
When things go wrong, why did you stay with us?
Hmm.
It's amazing how much golden nuggets you'll get from that one question.
It's a brilliant question. It prompted me actually my own question, Roderick, just to tie off the back of that. You talked a little bit in what you shared with us about the recognition as well, that ties into sort of fueling the performance engine, if you will. When you're talking about getting your experienced reps to share their knowledge, capturing a little bit more, I often get the question of like, oh, but I'm taking them away from their own activities to do it. So how do you tie recognition to that? How do you motivate your experienced reps to want to take part? What have you seen work really well to
I,
really create that intrinsic motivation to feed back
Another
into
great
it?
question. And I've seen it two ways. One, I go back to the sales leaders and say, you know what? My job as enablement leader is to make you and your people absolute stars. So I will take this and go blow them up and put their name up in lights all over the place. Because now, whether you believe it or not, the leaders are really competitive with each other, right? And so are our sales folks. Why would we not leverage that to get the word out there and make them look amazing? The other piece is, if you're in a company where you have a high potential program, grab those hypos and make that a part of what's moving forward for them to not only grow, but progress in their careers as well.
Hmm. Yeah, and actually, just popping up in the chat now, Roger, we've got a question from Crystal, also about motivation, but slightly different one. When we're thinking about our sales teams at scale, how do we discover the individual seller's motivations? Like what's going to work for them? How do we uncover that?
Absolutely. In a word, survey. One is survey, and second is conversations. We do a lot of things where we send out, quantitative, qualitative surveys, which are great. But you know what? come out of the ivory tower, go out there and actually talk to people. Find out what's working for them. What do they wish they had? And that's one of the best questions that you can ask, right? And you can even, I've even done it this way. Look, in quotes, I keep hearing that salespeople are coin operated, they're motivated by monetary. And it's true. And I always ask as part of this, what drives you beyond just the monetary piece? And that's what comes back to you. And that's where you now dive in and you create those processes, those programs, and also that celebration piece that we were just talking about.
Yeah, I love it. It comes back to there's a key theme here, Roderick. Keep asking questions that I'm hearing from you.
There
Uh,
is a theme here. Absolutely.
what have you come? Are there any key themes from asking those questions in businesses you work with or alongside of what some of the common ones are that are motivating reps when they've been asked?
Yeah. Sometimes it's they want to be spread out beyond just their particular region. They may be the rock star in EMEA, but America has no idea what their best practices are. So what I did was I created a series of community spotlight. And so I would bring people from different regions and even different roles. Because think about it. When we close a deal and we ring the bell and we talk about who's going, it's always sales, sales, sales. What about the people in legal that helped you? What about the people that are in deal desk that helped you? What about the other folks on the back end of CSMs that have helped you? Then we pull everybody together, and guess what? We put a spotlight on all of them. And then we all put a spotlight on best practices across collaboration and cross functional pieces. Because rarely does anybody say, hey, product marketing, thank you for that first call pitch. Right? But think about it. If you don't have it, you don't have the consistent messaging and positioning, you don't have the competitive landscape and all of the landmines, you can't go lay them. So don't forget the other people too.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. I think some fantastic insights. I think just one last question to wrap us up, and Roderick, is before we sort of move to the sort of final wrap up. What have you seen the biggest differences in the businesses that get this right and the ones that don't? What does that impact look like in terms of the business performance?
I'll give an analogy first. Um, there's a lot of companies that are trying to do the right things. The ones that have been successful are the ones that are doing the things right. Think about that one. Now, let me give you some meat on the bone. If we don't infuse enablement into the culture of a company, it dies. If it's not driven from the top down, i.e., if it is not one of your CEO or your SVP of RevOps, whatever it may be, if it's not enablement's not of one of your top 3 or 5 initiatives, you're just the fixers of broken things and broken people. If you don't have a mechanism to constantly get feedback from the field, it dies. I look at enablement as the orchestra master. You think about an orchestra, woodwinds, brass, percussion, etc. They're all trying to play the right song. Problem is sometimes they're out of tune, sometimes they're playing on top of each other. The same thing happens inside of a company until one person or organization, which I believe is enablement, gets up, taps the stand, and then it turns all of that noise into a beautiful sheet of music. That's what we have to do. We have to become what I call the translators of dialects and languages. We've got to speak marketing, product marketing, HR, engineering, sales, and then go back, work with them, take all of the feedback from them, and then translate it into to go to market. I would say sales, but into go to market. You've got to speak differently to a BDR, no different than you do an AE or a CSM or a sales leader, right? You have to not just know your audience, not just know your persona. You have to talk to them in common terms that matter something to them. The thing I have the hardest with enablement is we're always talking in enablement ease. Stop it. Go learn the language, Spanish, French, German, whatever, Italian, whatever it may be. Learn their language and speak to them in their language. And then take their language and go translate it into all the other lines of business inside of your company. And also, the one thing I've seen people, the companies work best, don't forget about partners and alliances. We treat them like a third cousin at a family reunion that we rarely see, but yet we expect those partners in business to bring us revenue. They don't owe us anything. Make it so that it's easy for them to do that and make sure that we are co-selling, not cross-selling or stepping on top of each other. Does that answer the question, Anna?
I think it does, and I'm going to go learn all my languages, Roderick, not just my go-to-market team languages, but my Spanish, my French, my Portuguese as well. No, I really I think the importance of communication and how we communicate is so underrated in a lot of contexts.
We're change management agents at our core. We truly are. And I said earlier, change is difficult, change is painful. But if you're doing it collaboratively and cooperatively, it's a lot less painful. There's a lot less friction in the process. I'm not saying it's going to be utopia. Oh, God, no. But there are ways to smooth off the rough edges to make it a bit easier.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I love the analogies. I think particularly what spoke to me was you talked about how infusing enablement into the culture of the company is so important. And I think as we wrap up today, just sort of recapping a little bit of what I've heard from you, bringing together those two pieces of the puzzle from the tribal knowledge to that culture of continuous learning. I can see how uh, using another one of your analogies, Roderick, being the conductor of the orchestra across the go-to-market teams is so important. But I think that getting that feedback back, you talked about the mechanism to continuously get the feedback from the field is so important. And often the thing that I hear folks that we're talking to are finding one of the hardest, that 90-day cliff at the start, like when that's shifting from the onboarding world into that continuous improvement, knowing what's happening in the market, seeing how your team are responding to it, and how that needs to transform the conversations that are sort of moving forward feels like the close to that loop that you're referencing. If I've understood kind of where you were going with that.
You absolutely nailed it. And that's precisely why my company has partnered with Hive Perform, because we are aligned in taking that next step, not as a follower, but as leaders co-jointly together, of taking practical application from practitioners like myself and others and putting it together with best in breed, not just best of breed, but world class learning, moving forward, performance together. And I think those are not just symbiotic, but they're hand in glove, and they're required to go back to that question of what have I seen work and not work? This is what works.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you said it so well. Thanks so much, Roderick. There, and I think both of us, Roderick and myself, and at High Perform, would love to continue this conversation and hear the thoughts of others. Please do connect with us both here on LinkedIn. We're really passionate about transforming the way that businesses approach this and really helping organizations to bridge that gap between learning and revenue performance. But one question from me as you head back to your own teams today, ask yourself my reflection from what Roderick shared with us today. In this marathon of continuous learning and performance, where is your team really hitting its stride? Where might they be running out of steam? And what could it mean for you if you could transform that marathon into that sustainable journey of growth that Roderick's talked to us about, from first talent acquisition all the way through to the ongoing management of the team? So what does it mean to bring productivity down from 11 months to really ensure that every rep gets stronger every step? So that's just kind of my thought of the day. I'm going to be thinking a little bit about that, Roderick, and I really appreciate you joining us today. I've got lots to take away from this, and I hope to hear some more questions over future conversations from folks who've joined us as well.
Looking forward to it. And again, thank you so much. I'm truly honored.